Three men went into that alley intending to send a message. What Dante Morretti found when he arrived, 40 seconds too late, which was the only way he was ever going to arrive, was two of them face down on the asphalt and the third on his knees, both wrists locked at angles that ended careers. Standing over all three, in a burgundy cardigan with her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, was Nora Callahan, the librarian, his librarian. He had come to save her. She did not appear to need saving. Let me take you back to the beginning, because that alley was the end of something, not the start. Nora Callahan had run the Special Collections Archive at the Meridian Public Library for 6 years before Dante Morretti ever heard her name. She was 41, broad-shouldered and solidly built in the way that takes up space without apology, with dark hair threaded early with silver and hands that moved through databases and document boxes with the speed of someone who had spent a professional lifetime making information do exactly what she needed it to do. Before the library, she had spent 8 years as an intelligence analyst with the U.S. Army, embedded in logistics units in 2 separate theaters of operation. Her job had been pattern recognition, finding the lie inside the data, reading a supply manifest, and knowing 3 lines in where 400 kilograms of equipment had been quietly redirected. She had left that work because it had taken things from her she hadn't expected to miss. She had come to the library to be around things that stayed still. Then Dante walked in, and nothing stayed still after that. He had come for a property deed sealed in the pre-1987 municipal archive. His lawyer had called 3 times and been told no each time. Dante came himself because he had learned over 20 years that people who kept saying no usually had a reason, and reasons were either problems to be solved or assets to be acquired. He found Nora at her desk annotating a document in pencil so fine it was nearly invisible, and told her what he needed. She looked up once. Court order or authorization from the city archivist. You have neither. Your lawyer established that when he called. He did, Dante said, and instead of leaving he sat down in the chair across from her desk, which no one did, and said, I came to ask why it's sealed. She told him. Not because she owed him anything, but because she recognized the kind of man who would find out regardless, and she preferred people to find out from her. The deed was tied to a contested estate, locked by court order pending final judgment. Anyone who moved on that parcel was walking into 30 years of active litigation. Dante listened without interrupting. Then, you just saved me a serious problem. That's what librarians do, Nora said, and went back to her annotation. He returned 6 more times that month, always with legitimate requests, always with the same quality of attention, the kind that registered what she actually said, rather than what he had expected to hear. By the 5th visit, he was bringing coffee. By the 7th, she had told him to stop unless he planned to drink some himself, because she was not a performance. He laughed at that, and it clearly surprised him. The following Tuesday, he came back with 2 cups. None of this stayed invisible. In Dante's world, nothing ever did. Victor Crane had known Dante Morretti for 22 years and resented him for 21 of them. They had started under the same capo, and Victor had watched Dante systematically outmaneuver him in judgment, in loyalty, in everything that moved a man up the structure. With a cold, specific resentment, he had learned to dress as patience. Victor was intelligent. He simply wasn't wise. When his people reported that Dante had been visiting a public library with unusual regularity, Victor did not see a man conducting research. He saw something Dante valued that was not yet behind walls. He saw pressure, waiting to be applied. Victor came to the library on a Tuesday afternoon when he knew Dante was there. That was the point. He walked in with 2 men, moved through the reading room without lowering his voice, and stopped at the special collections desk. Dante sat 8 feet away and watched him arrive. Victor looked at Nora with the slow, deliberate inventory of a man who had made his assessment before he walked through the door. Then he said it, loudly enough that it carried across the room. So you're who Dante's been spending his Tuesdays on. He let his eyes move over her with the particular, practiced contempt of someone who has rehearsed the cruelty in advance. I'll be honest, I expected something different. Must be a slow season for him, or maybe he just likes a lot to look at. His two men produced the required laughter. The graduate student at the far table found his laptop screen suddenly and completely absorbing. The silence from everyone else was the kind that makes the original wound worse by surrounding it. Nora set down her pencil. She looked at Victor Crane for 3 full seconds without changing her expression. Then she said quietly enough that only he could hear, "You made a long drive to say something that short. I'll note it." She picked up her pencil and went back to work. Victor turned and looked directly at Dante. He was smiling. He had made his point. He believed he had found the soft place. Dante met his eyes, said nothing. Victor left still smiling, which was the specific error of every man who has ever confused silence with submission. Psychologists call this contempt, and John Gottman, after 4 decades of studying what corrodes human dynamics across thousands of subjects, identified it as the single most damaging force one person can deploy against another. Not anger, which is hot and exhausts itself. Contempt communicates something colder and more deliberate. That you are beneath consideration, that your existence in the room is an offense simply by occurring. Victor had deployed it with the precision of someone who had practiced. What he had also done, without understanding it, was reveal exactly what he feared, because contempt, Gottman consistently found, is always a defense. It is what people reach for when something they cannot directly control has begun to threaten them. Dante heard every word of it. He sat with it for exactly the time it took him to finish his coffee. Then he made 2 calls, not to act yet, but to map the situation. Victor had moved in public. He had targeted something Dante valued and done it with an audience. That was not a test. That was a declaration. What Dante did not yet know was that Nora had already started her own work. She had been running Victor Crane's financial architecture through a database she technically no longer had clearance to access, but had never lost the habit of using. She had started 11 days earlier, the morning after Victor's first probe. A dropped comment at a city function reported to her by a contact she maintained from her Army years. Nora believed in closing loops before they opened. She had been building a file. She was deciding when to use it. Nobody who actually knew Nora Callahan would have called her passive, but nobody who didn't know her could have predicted what came next. Victor, emboldened by the library visit and what he interpreted as Dante's silence, moved to the next phase 11 days later. He sent 3 men on a Thursday evening. 20 minutes after closing, the alley behind the building, not visible from the street. He wanted her frightened. He wanted a message delivered to Dante in the form of her fear. Nothing permanent. Victor was not reckless. He simply did not take her seriously as anything other than a means to an end. He sent 3 men. What Victor Crane did not know about Nora Callahan: 8 years of Army intelligence included mandatory combat training, and she had continued that training for 15 years afterward. Not out of aggression, but out of the actuarial logic of a woman who worked alone in a building full of records that very powerful people periodically wanted gone. She held proficiency in 2 disciplines. She had not needed to use them in 18 months. That did not mean she had forgotten. The first man grabbed her arm. She broke the grip in under 2 seconds. The second man escalated and discovered that the geometry of his approach had already been read and countered before he completed it. He met the dumpster at a velocity that settled the matter. The third man had the most experience and should have recalibrated. He did not recalibrate in time. He went to his knees, both wrists immobilized, staring up at a woman in a burgundy cardigan who had not raised her voice and was breathing at approximately her resting rate. She asked him who sent them. She already knew. She asked because confirmation from the source closes the loop. He confirmed it. She called Dante before she called anyone else. Not because she needed him, because she had information that belonged to the person who could act on it most effectively. and she was not the kind of person to sit on operational intelligence out of pride. Dante arrived 40 seconds too late. 2 men down, one on his knees, Nora standing. He had come to save her. She did not appear to need saving. The expression on his face as he took in the alley was not relief. Relief was for near misses. What moved across Dante Morretti's face was something more fundamental, the expression of a man watching his entire working model of a situation be rebuilt from the floor up in real time. In her research on predictive processing, Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett found that the human brain does not passively perceive reality. It constructs it, continuously generating predictions about what it expects to find and reconciling those predictions against incoming evidence. When the evidence contradicts the model at a foundational level, the brain must reconstruct the model entirely. This process does not feel like learning. It feels like impact. Dante Morretti stood in that alley and felt it. He said, "Are you hurt?" "No." "Did they say who sent them?" She handed him her phone. On it was a folder she had been building for 11 days. Victor Crane's complete financial architecture, rooting through a Cayman account unchanged since 2019, a cross-referenced inventory of assets and their specific legal vulnerabilities, and a 1-page action summary ordered by speed and enforceability. Third folder is the most actionable. The account routing voids his standing in 3 pending contracts if it surfaces in the right place. I can tell you exactly where that is. Dante looked at the phone. He looked at her. He was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. Then, "Where did you get clearance for this database?" "I retained access," Nora said. "It's a distinction people in my former field tend to understand." Victor Crane had made exactly one mistake that Thursday evening. He was about to spend the next several weeks finding out what it cost. What followed was not dramatic in the way that violence is dramatic. It was thorough in the way that good intelligence work is thorough. Dante moved through Nora's documentation with the efficiency of a man who had been waiting for exactly this quality of information. By Saturday morning, Victor's accounts were frozen through a sequence of regulatory flags and counterparty withdrawals that appeared to anyone examining them entirely unrelated to each other. By Monday, 2 of his primary business relationships had quietly dissolved. By Wednesday, the Cayman routing had surfaced in exactly the venue Nora had identified, and Victor's legal team stopped returning calls from people who had considered him untouchable 48 hours earlier. Victor received his final communication in the form of an envelope delivered to his front door. Inside was a single printed page, the account routing summary, annotated in pencil so fine it was nearly invisible. No name, no threat, just the data, arranged in the handwriting of someone who had known exactly what they were building and exactly when to release it. He understood immediately. He also understood there was nothing remaining to do with that understanding. Dante came to the library the following Tuesday. He sat in the chair across from Nora's desk, the chair he had claimed on his first visit, the details she had noticed and filed without quite acknowledging, and set 2 cups of coffee on the corner of her desk. "You compiled that file before they sent the men," he said. "I compiled it when I understood what he intended to do," she said. "I was evaluating how to deploy it. You were going to handle it without me." "I was keeping my options open," she said, which was accurate. "You had better institutional reach. It made more sense." He looked at her for a moment. "I want to have dinner with you, not as a thank you, as a proposition." She looked at him over her coffee cup. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind where I stop pretending I come here exclusively for the archive," Dante said. She considered this for approximately the same 4 seconds he had stood in the alley recalibrating everything. Then, "Saturday. Somewhere with a wine list worth actually reading, and you should know, I eat a full meal." "So do I," he said, and this time she saw the smile without the control around it. There is something that happens when two people who have each learned to move through the world alone recognize in a single unguarded moment that they do not have to. That someone else has been keeping pace with them the entire time, at the same altitude, reading the same data. It does not announce itself. It arrives the way a completed file does, quietly and ready once you finally decide to open it. If this story landed somewhere real for you, the like button is one way to acknowledge it. And if you want more stories about people who are underestimated right up until they aren't, subscribe. The next one is already waiting.